Hello, everybody. Let me introduce Chana. First of all, I'm Nancy Luria, and Gloria Schneider sends her regrets about not being here this time, and so does Ms. Rosenzweig, who also couldn't be here tonight. But we're really looking forward to this discussion of Beautiful Little Fools by Jillian Cantor. And Chana Krasnjanski is an English teacher in the high school. She teaches 10th and 11th grade, and she does a filmography class for 12th graders. She's a passionate teacher, and we've been looking forward to tonight. Kids don't call you by your full last name, right? They
call me Miss K.
Ms. K.
Yes.
Okay.
But everyone here could just call me Chana, or if they need to say my name.
Okay, so I think we're ready to. Oh, and she also is a knitter. You might have caught a moment back as she was, working on something right before the class. Okay, so we're ready.
Okay, so I guess I just want to start before we get started, and I like to get started with a check-in, just how everyone experienced the reading. But before that, just for the sake of knowing how to lead the conversation, I had suggested to reread Gatsby since it's so intimately working with the details of the original novel. So I'm just curious how many people actually read it, because I don't want to spend too much time referring to things from the original if very few people have read it. So I'm just curious how many people read the original.
I went to the Cliff Notes.
Okay. No. Okay. Hi. Okay.
I ran out of time.
Okay.
But had you read it before?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Okay. Well, that was going to be my other question. Was it a novel that everybody read in high school? Oh, 3 times that people read in high school, or did you read it in college or on your own? The original Gatsby. I'm just curious, like what we're hearkening back to for those of you that didn't get to reread it.
High school.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe high school and again sometime.
Got it. Okay. So there's no test. So, high school is like it was a while ago for all of us. So, okay. It's just helpful to know. I'm going to make some reference because Jillian herself makes reference to some specific moments of the story. So I'll bring it up, but it's okay if you haven't reread it. So I just like to always start with a check-in of what people's reading experiences were with this novel, especially because it's working with the material of another book. So did people enjoy it? Did people not enjoy it? Whatever. I don't know. Just, what were your reactions to it? Anyone want to start? Just go. Sure. Go right in. This isn't class, so feel free to jump right in.
I enjoyed it a lot, but my question is, when is an author allowed to take someone else's material, and now she sells a book, makes a lot of money, etc., but it's really the same story, obviously from different angles. So I just wanted to think about that.
So are you asking actually from a technical level, like copyright material, or just on a more creative level?
Both.
Because actually the copyright was a big part of the story. So the copyright runs out after a certain number of years. Sorry, Phyllis, you want to comment on that? You look like you have something to say.
No, I just remember the author talks about it at the end. So she waited till the copyright ran out.
Yeah. So actually, this was not the first book that came out. Once the copyright lifted, there was another book. There are a few books that had come out dealing with, whether reimagining or conversing with Gatsby. And the first one that came out was actually really abysmal, which is why I didn't recommend it. It's called Nick, and it's actually Nick who's the narrator of Gatsby. It's his backstory. I guess kind of going back as he goes to fight in World War I, like F. Scott Fitzgerald himself did, right? He left Princeton and goes to fight in World War I. So Nick is about Nick and Nick's own backstory. So a number of writers jumped on the opportunity to engage with the material once the copyright passed. So it was legally something that they were allowed to do. This was the one, though, that hit the mainstream and was actually good. So it got traction the way that others didn't. Anyone else have any
Do
reactions?
we encourage that? Is that kind of thing? It's like with sequels in movies also.
Sure.
Anyway.
I actually want to like go down that particular path outside of the technical side in terms of like the copywriting. So that's why I'm happy to, switch to that conversation because there's I think a number of things and it's a great way to start talking about this book. But before we come back to your point, Ziva, I just want to know if does anyone want to share their reaction to the
I had a few thoughts. One was
Sure.
it's the difference between fan fiction and being able to have it published by a major publisher, which is a difference in this book. Like there's plenty of fan fiction out there. But the other difference that was kind of running through my mind was it has to do a better job than AI. That's the standard that we're now holding it to. Hey, ChatGPT, tell the story, but from this, the women's perspective. And for that, I felt like you had to make it like plausible, like it's a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead takeoff of Hamlet, right? So things had to all happen and their motives had to be true. Like I think ChatGPT would have been doing a better job of being more like lyrical in F. Scott Fitzgerald's ability to write, which when you try to copy, you're going to fall short. And nobody's freckles have ever looked like poppy seeds on a bagel. But the story and their motives, I thought, were well thought out. Like there could have been more editing on other things, but why they did what they did and how they felt, I thought was true to the times and true to human nature.
Mhm.
So I read through it like I was enthralled or entranced in it. I read it and I wanted to read more and I kept reading them. But I also felt that it was a little bit like not a beach read, but a light read in some cases. So I didn't feel that way about The Great Gatsby. But I liked it. I liked how she wove the story and developed it in the way. But and we can talk about this later. I had one idea of Gatsby in The Great Gatsby and a different idea of him in this book.
Yeah.
So that's all I want to say now.
Okay. Yeah. So again, not everyone reread Gatsby, but from memory, I do want to touch on what our impressions were of how she presented the characters and our memory, if you're going back to a reading from previously, or if you reread it currently. John, do you want to share any of your reactions on your reading experience? Wait, hold on. You're muted. Do you mind unmuting yourself?
Okay, at first, the characters seem, almost totally preoccupied with finding someone to love, which I suppose is okay, but as it developed, I became more engrossed, not, I think, just because of the thriller aspect, because I don't really read thrillers, but somehow it became darker and more provocative and more interesting.
Okay. Was there anything in particular that you found, like any particular storyline that stood out to you as it got darker that you were intrigued by?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm part of the game is to set up a situation where each of the three women has a motive to kill Jay. So you really have to follow each of them.
Exactly. I thought she did a good job in that way. Like it wasn't like they all seemed guilty, right? In some point or other. So Dina, you just joined. We're just checking in quickly on our reading experiences or our reaction to the story. Do you want to share what it was like for you to read Beautiful Little Fools?
Well, I'm glad that I read Beautiful Little Fools before rereading Great Gatsby. I hadn't read Great Gatsby since high school. So as I was reading it, like I knew something was different, something was amiss, but then it was very fun to read Great Gatsby again and like see how it really filled in a lot of gaps, almost a little too much. I liked a little of the mystery in Great Gatsby, wondering who these women really were, what they were thinking, but it was interesting to read it that way.
Okay. So the reason why I picked this book is because, so as a teacher, I often find, like, if I come into a unit, there's the typical narrative, so to speak, and the typical topics to be discussed. Like right now I'm teaching about Macbeth. Okay, so power and ambition and how it blinds us and we can make terrible decisions based on it, et cetera, right? So everyone's got like the storyline that is like the accepted storyline. And so also for Gatsby, like, here's the story of this man who spent so much time and energy focused on this woman that he loved, and it's this beautiful thing. And you just get so fixated. And it also, as a teacher, it becomes hard to separate out the minor points from the major ones, because I'm on limited time and I want to make sure my students could be part of some of these conversations when they get out there. So I don't want to nitpick the details. But what's really fun for me about this book is that she had the luxury to experience the book in 3D almost, and almost if it's like a hologram. And instead of the focusing on the flashing points that most people talk about, it's like she turned it on its side and found all these little moments and thought, okay, so that line. So for example, when she talks about it in the podcast where she's interviewed, so she actually said a really decisive moment for her, bizarrely enough, is a line that comes out of chapter 7. So for anyone who reread it or who didn't reread it, right, chapter 7 is the most dense chapter. It's the chapter where it's so hot, everybody is just like, they can't breathe physically, and all the main characters pile into a hotel room in the Plaza Hotel, and Gatsby at that point is doing his best to convince Daisy to leave Tom. Tom is freaking out, finally realizing Daisy may actually leave him. So he gets all aggressive back, and Daisy is caught in the middle, and she's like, leave me alone, everybody. I'm too hot and I can't deal with this. And then Nick's kind of watching this, and then Jordan's kind of watching this. And there's this line where Jordan, when Tom's doing his best to remind Daisy that even though he's cheated on her so many times, he really does love her. So please believe me, right? And so in those conversations of, remember this moment, I mean, yes, granted, I cheated on you right after our honeymoon, but remember when I carried you in the honeymoon, and all these little moments. Jordan has this one line where she talks about at Daisy's wedding, some guy collapsed and ended up staying at her house for a few weeks, right? And so she talks about being curious, like starting from this moment, because it seems to have been a very dark moment for Jordan, right? Which Gillian Cantor fleshes out that the man tries to, rape her. And so this one little line kind of intrigued her, for example. And so she wanted to pause and think, okay, well, if I take that thread and extend it out and think about Jordan as a person, because Jordan is like this flat character that just kind of pops in and out of these scenes. So this book to me was really fun, and allowing us to, which is something that as active readers, we probably do anyways. When you pause and you think about little moments like, that's interesting. I wonder what that really means. But instead of just glossing over those moments after spending a moment on thinking about those interesting moments, she instead expands it into a whole novel. So I thought that was just a delightful practice, and fun to then create into a whole book. So I wanted to actually talk a little, use that as the segue. Okay, so you had said, Ziva, right, thinking about the creativity of this. So does anyone think in reading Beautiful Little Fools that she had any primary characters or storylines? I mean, obviously besides who killed, Gatsby, but did anyone feel like there was a character or a storyline that stood out, or did you feel like this was her taking all of the characters and trying to just flesh them out further? I
mean, I don't even remember the detective from the reread of Gatsby.
He's not in the original.
Like there could have been, like there was a detective,
right,
but he threaded through the whole thing. Like that came together well in one of these like modern chopped up novels that goes back and forth in time. It was not so dislinear to read it, which is hard.
Yeah. Did anyone, I mean, that's true that the detective is like an added part. Does anyone feel like there was, is the story really his story and it's a detective story? Is the story like, how would you classify Beautiful Little Fools? Like, is it actually a detective story? Is it kind of a love story that just goes awry?
I think it's Daisy's story, isn't it, really? I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
it's her and the people around her, and that's this concept of beautiful little fools. Like
Feminist
all of the women
Vision.
are beautiful and maybe a little foolish.
Well, we definitely learn a lot more about Jordan in this in Beautiful Little Fools. We didn't have so much a sense of where she came from, what she was all about, why she was on that golf tour, or anything like that. And and what's the name of the woman from Catherine's sister, Myrtle?
Myrtle. Mhm.
Well, even Catherine, we learned a lot more about, and Myrtle
Yeah.
too. Myrtle too.
Yeah, Catherine in the original, it just pops in very briefly, and not much is told about her. Like you see her in scenes with other people, so you don't really get a strong sense of her. But it's interesting, Phyllis, that you feel like it's in reading this, that this feels like Daisy's story, because I'm wondering if other people feel that way. Like when I read it, actually, I feel like it's more Jordan's story, or maybe I just got pulled into the Jordan storyline because she's so unknown to us from the original. But I'm curious if anyone feels one way or the other, or is it just like a canvas with multiple parts to it, and it isn't exclusively anybody's story?
I would have thought, maybe if it weren't for that line you quoted, that Daisy would be the starting place.
Mm-hmm.
You would read The Great Gatsby. She's obviously a central character, but you don't find out much about her. And you would say, what did she think of all of this?
Yeah.
The other characters, I don't think you could, it isn't as if you have things to explain about them from the book. You just have a sort of a blank, which you could use to make up a story that would be consistent with the book, but would add a lot to it.
Hmm.
But the sort of the challenge would be to explain Daisy, because there you have something to explain.
Right.
What do you mean by that? Because what was explained to me, what I learned from Beautiful Little Fools, was that of why she married Tom and why she didn't wait for Gatsby. But I don't learn a lot more about her, whereas we learned a lot more about Jordan, Catherine, and some of the others. So, and she, even though she's the subject of the more than fascinations, what's the better word, of that Gatsby has for her,
Monomaniacal.
what's the word?
Wow, that's really harsh. That was really harsh. Really strong, I should say. Yeah, it's definitely.
That, other than that, which we knew from The Great Gatsby, she seems to me a little bit less of an interesting person. Something I don't get the depth of her as well. She's a product of where she grew up, but I mean, she just couldn't give up the money.
So does
Yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
I just, on Nancy's point, I was sort of disappointed in Beautiful Little Fools that Daisy, like her reaction to Gatsby, she does not feel anything for him. And I kind of wanted her to feel something for him, but then to make some kind of decision and make the right decision or the wrong decision, but like act. And instead she was just kind of like tired and hot and didn't feel anything and went on, in that way. I was like a little disappointed with that.
But it isn't what has to be explained about her exactly her ambivalence. Did she want to be with Tom? Did she want to be with Gatsby?
She wanted to be with her mother.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the surprise. So in that sense, Nancy, I would challenge one of the things that you said, in that in the original, right, Daisy is very flat. You get no depth to her. You just have moments of indecision, moments of flashy charm, right? So then you have, because you have that opening conversation she has with Nick, from which Beautiful Little Fools comes from, and she opens her heart to Nick and shares how miserable she is and how her money, right, she's so sophisticated, but though she's so sophisticated and she has everything and seen everything and knows everything, she feels like her life is empty. But then Nick follows up this whole conversation with, because she gives this laugh, and then all of a sudden he's like, I don't think I trust anything she said. I think that was a lie. That was basically a story she manufactured for me to feel for her, but I don't think she actually feels any of it. So the book kind of sets this tone that Daisy is the shallowest of women and you have nothing there. And Fitzgerald has this line at the end when we're giving the history of how Daisy came to be married to Tom. And basically it says she needed to act. She hated to be lingering in this in-between space. And so Tom was the available choice. And so she took it, but not because she liked Tom, but because she just couldn't stand indecisiveness. She couldn't stand like unknowing, right? And so she needed to have this definitive element to her identity. So she just chose to marry Tom. So in that sense, I think Gillian tries to, while staying true to the original, flesh her out, right? So she's got a mother she loves, she's got a sister that she adores, that's, that passed away, and she feels compelled to take care of her mother, which is why she ends up with this louse of a man, Tom, right? That's just a horrendous human being. And I guess why, Gatsby is just not a strong enough allure, doesn't have a strong enough allure for her. But does anyone else want to step in sharing like how you guys read Daisy? Are you more with Nancy and John, or is anyone more on my side of like Daisy does have depth in this, in your, in the Beautiful Little Fools?
Oops, I'm on mute. And I think the other two times I said it, I was also on mute, but I see it kind of as like a feminist revisionist retelling of this story, where even a person who was perhaps shallow at least got to be her whole shallow self, and when it was originally written, it wasn't far from the time when it happened. And so these were like the iconic characters that you would imagine at a party, or you'd imagine that you existed within this society. And so she played that role. And so she had to keep to that role. It actually, in that sense, now a little bit reminds me of, if people have seen Knives Out, which is a movie where different people from now, like I think I'm so smart, what's it called? Disruptor. It decided that, he can do anything at all, unlimited. And that's kind of like a Gatsby character. And he needs to own that thing. And that's like kind of like his Rosebud. Was she shallow? I think that she was supposed to come across as shallow. And if it turned out she had really deep thoughts and she was good at being quiet, I think we would be more disappointed.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing in all of this is that he dedicates the original Gatsby, Fitzgerald dedicates it to Zelda, right? And his wife Zelda was anything but shallow. I mean, she had a lot to her. So whenever I have the lesson on who were these characters to Fitzgerald as he's working through, because I believe that writers, somehow even subconsciously weave themselves into the text. So I love having the conversation of like, who is Daisy? Because he kind of adores this woman clearly, but also at the same time hates her. So like how, where does that fit in? But that aside, anyone else want to weigh in about Daisy's character, whether there was depth or lack of depth or appropriate just presentation of the 20s time?
I think you're right, though, that she did have more depth in this book, and I had forgotten about her mother and and sister. I am still confused, though. This is if you want to finish the Daisy. I'm still confused on how Myrtle.
Okay, we'll get to that. So before that, Aziva looked like you started to say something, but you're muted. No, go ahead. You're muted.
You did.
Yeah.
I think lack of depth. The whole story is about her. She's in the center of everything, but it's sort of like she keeps just getting swept up into it. But I don't think she makes a lot of decisions, as somebody said. And the other women are stronger, more active, more interesting characters, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always fun, I think, when films start, when directors want to cast Daisy as a character, like, who do you pick? Right? Have any of you? This is a totally separate question about
I watched it.
how many of you have actually watched both the 1974 whatever version and the recent version of the film? Have you seen both?
Just the recent for me.
Oh, okay. Who's seen? Okay, so that's what's her name? Michelle Williams. What's her name? Is it Michelle
I
Williams?
don't know.
Anyone see the original, the 1970 something? That's with Faye Dunaway.
Years ago.
Oh, Mia Farrow. It's Mia Farrow. I always get the two confused in my head. I don't know why. The big hair, whatever. So it's Mia Farrow, and it's really interesting because Mia Farrow and whoever plays the contemporary are really different. They're very, very different. I mean, they both have like a charm to them, but they're very different. So it's always interesting to see like who directors choose to kind of capture her character. So if you want as something entertaining, it's interesting. I would actually suggest watching both versions to see, because Nick is presented really differently. Gatsby is really different because you have Robert Redford in one and Leonardo DiCaprio, and those are very different men with very different energy. Tom is really different. The person who plays Tom in the current one is like a big, robust guy, and the original one is like a lanky, scrawny guy. So it's just really interesting to see.
Do you imagine this book being turned into a movie? Do you think people would watch it?
I think, I don't know. That's a great question. What do you guys think? I mean, I would watch it. What about you?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good mystery story too.
I mean, I committed to the book.
Yes. I think it would be really fun actually to see. But you said, Laura, about like the feminist aspect, and that's absolutely something that the author very clearly weaves in. Where, I mean, Catherine, who's like a nothing on the page, right, gets blown up into this, not blown up, but like, expanded into someone who becomes a suffragette. And then you also have Jordan as, like a lesbian who's trying to juggle what that's like to choose not to get married at that time when that was not so easy to do.
Women with guns and playing sports.
Yes.
On the golf tour, the women's golf tour.
Exactly. But you, Nancy, you said you had a question about, was it about Myrtle? You said you wanted to ask something about Myrtle's character.
Oh, the death. I didn't, it was in the original and in this one, right? I'm just trying to clarify this, which is somewhat of a lack of memory about what happened, but also maybe a little confusion, or certainly the way is Daisy was driving and Daisy hit her and
Yeah.
killed.
He ran out to the car, right?
Well, so this is actually how it goes
Wait,
down.
help me. Yeah, Ziva, I don't.
Actually how it goes down. So in chapter 7, like I said, it's the longest, densest chapter of the original of Gatsby. Gatsby is hanging out at Daisy's house and very openly flirting with Daisy. I think like Daisy even kisses him on the mouth with Tom just in the other room. So the both of them are being very provocative with each other. And then they're like, we're so bored. What should we do? And then they decide to go into the city. And Gatsby and Daisy decide to go in Gatsby's car. And Tom is like, yeah, whatever. Like as if he's not threatened by it. Like, whatever, fine, go do your thing. I'm not scared of you spending some time with this guy. Right. And then, so Tom drives with Nick, and Tom drives with Nick and Jordan into the city, but they end up swapping cars. So I'm trying to remember, I don't remember which way was which, but on the way, like Tom drives a car on one way that he swaps and Gatsby drives on the way back, which is how the confusion happens.
They're in their correct cars on the way back, but George sees Tom driving Gatsby's
That's
car.
on the way there.
Yellow car.
there. But the other real weird nuance to it is in a kind of chauvinistic way. Gatsby is trying to convince Daisy that actually she was driving. No, you turned the wheel at her. No, you were kind of drunk. You don't remember it right. So he's actually convincing her, and it's not clear whether it was her or him, whether he's giving her an alibi because he'll do anything out of his love to prove his love, or whether actually she's convincing her that she had done it so he can gain that power over her.
That's interesting. Okay, so I don't remember it that way. I thought the language, I have to go back to the chapter, pull it up. I thought the language in the original was pretty clear.
In the Jillian.
In the Jillian Candor. Okay. So
In
then
the
when
Jillian book, he's trying to convince
got it.
her
Who's the
that
he?
she did it either for the police, that's the alibi, or just to have the power over her.
yeah, because in the,
Gaslighting her, yeah.
yeah,
He
'cause-
even says that to
He. Who's the he?
Gatsby,
Gadsby says to
who held
George.
the wheel? Was Gatsby holding the wheel, or was Daisy?
I thought Daisy was driving in Beautiful Little.
But
In
in both
both.
cases, but he reaches the hand over. Was she swerving? I was swerving out of the way. You pulled me towards that. Oh, no, I pulled you away from it. And it
was too
wasn't
late.
clear
Yeah.
from the reading even whether that was going to be the alibi. But then when I saw that he was getting power over her and had a secret that made her, who killed him was just whoever got there first. Really, they were all equally guilty. One just happened to get there first.
What do you mean to get there first?
They all had guns. They all went there to kill him.
Oh, you're talking about the end of the book.
In the
But
contemporary.
why would that be an alibi for?
If it was found that they were the ones doing it, then
Doing what? Who killed her?
when they traced the car down, Gatsby was going to take the blame and for Daisy.
Or maybe they would run away together, but it
Also
was
said, but I know you did it.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So Ziva, how did you read it?
that would be his hold over her. I think he actually said that at the end somewhere.
Did, right. He said it
Someone
to
would come with me.
Yeah.
So
And I
in the,
It's a little manipulative. It was manipulative, actually.
And what happened in the original?
So in the original, after this whole intense afternoon, sweating and drinking and confronting in the hotel room, Tom, it's clear because Daisy basically pushes Gatsby away and was like, this is too much. I can't. So Tom sees that he won. So with a sense of magnanimity, he says, why don't you drive home with Gatsby? Right? As if, because he's showing her, I have such control over you. I trust you to go with this guy. And so Daisy leaves with Gatsby and he thinks Gatsby is driving, but in the end it was Daisy driving. And Daisy was really rattled by the whole afternoon and she's going really fast. Now Myrtle, in the meantime, thinking that it's Tom's car, runs out because she's ready to run away and she's done. So she runs out. Daisy is so distracted that she just mows right over her and like slices parts of her body. The book is a little bit graphic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens. And then Tom thinks it's Gatsby too. So Tom is all ready to, and basically Tom in the original, Tom goes to George and tells, or when George comes, I can't remember if he goes to George or George comes to him, but Tom is the one to reveal that it was Gatsby who did it.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, in that sense, Tom is.
And that's why George
Goes to
seems
kill
to
Gatsby.
kill
Yes.
Gatsby.
Yeah. And basically what happens in the way the book ends, it's really sad, is that so that night when Tom comes home, he and Daisy are sitting together around the table and Gatsby basically keeps vigil outside waiting for Daisy to come out and leave Tom, and she won't. And that's where you have this line as if like they're sitting together, like there's this intimacy in this moment, and you have Gatsby literally locked out on the outside, but not ready to let go and admit that it's over between him and Daisy. And for Nick, this whole closing, the end is really like the breaking point. And that's where there's the really famous line when Nick meets up with Tom a little bit later to say like what happened, and his commentary on Tom and Daisy are that they're careless people that that hurt people and leave everyone else to clean up the mess, whatever. That's that famous line from the novel. So this ending is meant to be really disruptive and jarring.
And Gatsby goes home, and
Gatsby's-
it's when is there really a mystery in who killed Gatsby in the original novel?
I mean, it seems
Wilson did it.
what?
Wilson did it.
Yeah,
in
it's,
the-
it's pretty.
Oh, yeah, so it's pretty clear he did it and then he killed himself, right?
Yeah, but I
And-
guess Julian thought it would be fun.
To
And
kind
that's the
of
story the
imagine
police
it
get.
different.
The case is closed. That's what they
Yeah.
decided. That's the way the book goes.
Okay,
What-
got
Yeah.
One of the things that you just said though, and twice, was that Tom thought it was magnanimous of him, like he was gonna be the good guy and trusting his wife. I didn't
I don't mean like a good way. I mean it in the way of the power way of like you.
like I dare you.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I read it's more like a power move. Like I have got you so in under my wing right now, back in control. It doesn't intimidate me for you to be with the guy that you're trying to sleep with. You
something
read-
I almost expected is that Catherine would somehow, because we know the other players, I almost expected Catherine to somehow tell Jay that he has to switch cars on the way down, and that somehow she would be involved in things turning out that way just to get Wilson angry.
Oh,
I expected her to have a hand in that.
oh, me too. But that's so Jillian's a little bit different. So in Jillian's, Gatsby is a much more sinister character, and
Yeah.
he's manipulating and moving everybody. I was just saying that in terms of Tom from the original. When you read the original Gatsby, like that's how Tom comes across when he says for Daisy to go with Gatsby. Jillian's, I think, is maybe a little bit different.
Catherine had it in her to do a thing like that. She did a lot of things nobody suspected. Like she led multiple lives. She gave off, farm girl, or when the detective came and visited her, she was sleeping with Gatsby for months. She's never seen that pin before. Like she had so many other things. I thought that was just going to be one more trick up her sleeve.
Yes. So
I-
she's oh, good.
When you just mentioned about Gatsby, that's I felt him not really a very strong character in The Great Gatsby, and sort of a little pathetic. I don't know, like he was so infatuated with Daisy, and I just didn't get a strong sense of him as a character.
He seemed like lonely and you didn't know much about him and obsessed with her. Like, you're right. As you just said, in this book, he's manipulating people, but in the other book, he's not at all. He's more mysterious, but more sad and not nebuch because he's wealthy, but yeah, he's not enjoying his wealth or anything.
But I was never clear on how he made his money or continues to make his money, which sounded also very sinister.
Because he was a bootlegger, I think.
Yeah.
And also working with that guy who threw the World Series.
Oh, Wolfsheim.
Jewish guy.
Yeah, Wolfsheim. So the
Yeah.
book suggests a few things. The book suggests bootlegging. The book also suggests that he was making illegal bonds. And that's because he mentions Walter Chase. So there's this, he basically forges bonds, and that's how he makes most of his money illegally. That's where he got his millions from. I think the bootlegging is like a side hustle, but it's more like the bonds. I mean, I guess securities has since tightened up, like for real. And I guess back then it was easier to commit.
And he latched on to that original rich person with a boat whose painting he had, who,
Right.
taught him tricks that were beyond the innocence of his face.
Yeah, Dan Cody. Yeah. Because Dan Cody, you found out, was a hustler out west who made money through the silver mines and the copper mines. And they calls him even like basically they calls him like, I'm not calling him a prostitute, but some kind of way of like, he just made his money taking advantage of every possible opportunity. So sure, he definitely learned how to do that. And he has this moment where Gatsby offers Nick a payback for helping him with Daisy to like, do you want to get in on my securities fraud? And Nick is like, no, I mean, I work on Wall Street, but do not want to go down that path with you. So there's like that little thread. The thing though about Gatsby from the original, and this is one of the things that's either fascinating to you or problematic, is that you really only know Nick. I mean, you really only know Gatsby because of Nick. And so all you're really getting to know is Nick's infatuation with the guy. And that's why he's both the focus of the story, but also really flat. So, and why he's such an endless source of fascination is its own conversation. Like, why is Nick so fascinated by him? Is there like, is it just the opposite of who Nick's character is? Or does he think there's something so ultimately American about this guy because he made it from nothing? Or is there some like undercurrent of sexual something because he has these weird moments of describing his looks in certain ways? So I don't know, it leads to a lot of interesting discussion in class of like, why is Nick so infatuated with
They
Gatsby?
addressed that cutely. They said, you're spending your whole, are you on a date with me or are you on a date with Gatsby when he's out with Jordan at the plaza? And that was cute because that's something that comes up in the first volume, whereas Jordan, sure, was fair for the pickings. Like she had short hair and was into sports. That's not allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you guys think? I mean, for those of you who reread it or who remember from high school, like what was something that made Gatsby so attractive and such a focus for Nick?
Well, didn't they always talk about the blonde hair and the like swaying hair or something like as if he would be flipping it or something? I don't know.
Yeah, the book does talk about his smile. He has this enchanting smile.
He's charismatic, which Nick does not have. Nick is as plain as can be. Like he's handsome in a plain sort of way. And, that's exactly what Gatsby has. He's like, how does he do that? Can I copy that? Do people hang out with me when they're, they can't have him?
And the fact that he has these parties and that attracts so many people to his home is sort of intriguing, I think, to Nick, that he can be such a, whether it is charisma or it's opportunity or it's availability, those parties are something,
Yeah,
I think the first, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dina.
I kind of remember the first time Nick meeting Gatsby in the original, he doesn't know, right, that he's talking to Gatsby. And I felt like that's what made Gatsby who he was in the original, just like stealth and slinking around. And I could see why a Robert Redford or a Leonardo DiCaprio would be cast to play him, even though you're right, they're so different, but they're leading men. I mean, with this book, like I can't see either of those playing him. He, as Nancy said, is like almost pitiful, like I can't think of an actor off the top of my head, but it would be not a Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah. No, fair enough. The thing though that was weird about his parties, right, is that exactly as you said, right? He's like, he kind of slips in and out. He's like a shadow at his party. So people don't even know who he is, which is what makes Nancy those parties so odd. Like who throws together parties and attracts so many people and doesn't bask in the limelight? He also does weird things like a girl ripped her dress and he bought a dress for her. He sent it to her after the party, but it was like a really...
He told everyone she knows.
What?
And she told everyone she knows and people she doesn't know.
Yes.
Worth it.
So,
and the food and the drink and the music, everything's right there. Who wouldn't want to go to, spend your Friday, Saturday night in a place like that?
Oh, sure. Oh, why people want to go to the parties, I think there's no question. Absolutely. Those were definitely a place to be and to be seen. So I'm just curious, like what, okay, let's see if we talked about anything else. So what do you guys think were like Jillian Cantor's, like, what is she trying to flesh out for us? So like you had said, Laura, that you think she's trying to give, Daisy some, give her a little bit more emotional depth.
All of the women.
Okay.
All the women. Yeah.
Okay. Anything in specific you think she was trying to show for each character?
Well, there's definitely feminism, and then there's also wokeness. Like there's everything. There's lesbian, there's whatever, everything. But to feminism, so as you said, she was a suffragist, Catherine, living on her own. They were strong women making decisions, choosing their lifestyles or
It
their
came alive again when she stepped outside of her marriage.
Right. So I don't know if that's realistic, but it's definitely,
Woke.
yeah.
I was struck by the extreme chauvinism of virtually all the male characters. Not only Tom, but certainly Gatsby,
Wilson.
George,
Or
Father
and,
cutting off his teenage daughter's long hair.
right,
Don't try
and
this at home.
maybe even Nick, potentially at least.
So
Was
what
Myrtle, was Myrtle abused in the book?
I didn't think I remembered that.
I
he
didn't.
locks her in the room, but it never talked about bruises.
Yeah, no. So George is presented as a pathetic man, and there's this last ditch effort. He's realizing that she's cheating on him, and there's this attempt to lock her in, but she breaks out in the book. So it's a very symbolic gesture. And when you read her physical description, like she's described very physically as like this very buxom, vivacious, sexual woman. So it's really more like a gesture that he does. That it doesn't seem that there's any abuse. I mean, Myrtle gets hit by Tom, and that's a very intense moment, right? He smashes his palm on her nose. So that's like the one moment of physical violence.
Is that in both books? I know it's in Julian's book. Is that in the Gatsby book too?
Oh yeah, it's intense. It's the second chapter. It's how you meet. It's like so the second chapter of the book is this party. So basically Tom has a crib, a house, like an apartment, not a house, an apartment in the city where he takes his women to, and she sets up shop there and she gets to rule. And there's all these people that they invite over, lots of drinking going on. And they get really, really drunk. They slip off to have sex and then they come back and everyone's really wasted. And in the course of that conversation, there's all these rumors people are talking about where that Myrtle herself seems to generate that Daisy's going to leave, Tom is going to leave Daisy. And the only reason why he hasn't yet is because she's Catholic and they can't get divorced. And then Tom is kind of basically like, shut up, Myrtle. And she was like, you can't tell me what to say. I could say whatever I want. Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. I could say your wife's name as much as I want. And he's like, basically shut up. And he like smacks her with his palm. And her nose just bursts out like gushing blood. It's a really aggressive moment in the book. And that's your introduction to Tom too. And you're like, what a man. And what a relationship.
And in the book, in Julian's book, it's very clear that he had many affairs, totally inappropriate. Is that as clear in Fitzgerald's book?
Yeah, right after honeymoon, they start to have,
Right.
affairs. The other thing that's interesting in the original is he likes a certain kind of woman, and that's basically people of a lower social class than him. So he sleeps with maids, like the help. I mean, you have more, she includes, I think, some more details. Like in the original, you have the chambermaid right after his, honeymoon. And then you have just like there's stuff that's put out there because he doesn't hide the women. So there's this line that suggests that he brings his women out in public, to restaurants and things. But she goes into more detail, but they all seem to be of the same kind of woman.
So that's, I feel like, Daisy is pathetic for staying with him, except for the fact that she's using him in a certain way too, to provide her and her mother and her family and, with material.
But she's the only woman who's a kept woman. In other words, all the other women either have a career or have choices, and she doesn't in Julian's book. Well, in either book, but especially in Julian's book.
Well, so what do you guys think about that? Because Nancy, you said very casually, like she could have left him, right? You're kind of surprised that she doesn't. But what do you think the mindset would have been for a woman in the 1920s? Was it an obvious thing? Like, my man's a scumbag. He's cheating on me all the time. It is my right to be happy and I should leave him? Or is that a very modern reaction so that her thought process would be very different? Like, I'm really miserable. I'm really unhappy. I wish he loved me and didn't cheat on me. But it wouldn't necessarily lead to her thinking, of course, I need to leave him.
You're right about that.
She also
Well
liked
done.
she also liked being Mrs. Buchanan, right? And all the respect that came with that. Or
But in those days, if you went back to your mother would often send you back to your husband because that's how it was, and appearances, just you should be married, and that's the most important thing.
And she didn't like her daughter, I thought, as much in the original book as she did in the Beautiful Little Fools. Like, she loved her baby and thought, oh, this might be enough for me. But in the original, she didn't
Only
seem
when
to
the world
exhibit her.
failed her. She didn't bond with her kid early. It's more like, nobody loves me, this child will love me, and nothing makes me happy. Maybe this can make me happy.
In the original, you're saying?
No, in the modern one.
Yeah.
I don't think she was a part of the child's life in the beginning, and she was fine with that.
Yeah, that's also hard for me I'm looking at it with modern sensibilities that you would think that there would be something that would give her happiness. And if it wasn't her husband, she might be more involved with her daughter. And she
I
was.
think she wanted to be, I think, right? But her husband kept insisting that they keep a nurse or something, right?
Yeah.
She says early on that she wanted to be more involved.
Yeah, because think about it, for wealthy women, they absolutely did not nurse their children, right? They had literally, right, they had a wet nurse, and then they absolutely had a nurse to take care of it. So I think in a specific for those early years, I don't know how much, it was almost like a very unclassy thing to want to bond with your child at such a young age. And as they grow up and as they become more like human, right, and adult like, then you can bond when they've been trained already.
Also, his infidelity began with her morning sickness, and then her not feeling up to much when she was pregnant, and then having the needs of a small child. So she wasn't in any state to leave anytime before that, before the honeymoon ended.
It's true.
One thing that struck me was how young these women are. They're talking about, they've destroyed their lives and there's nothing left for them. And then you find they're 21.
Yeah.
People still say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure they do.
Yeah.
Well, you can feel that way when you're that age, but
Still going.
at the end, all three of them do have futures, presumably.
Yeah, no, that's
We're all making a new start in one way or another.
Yeah, that is true. I know it's interesting to think, like, where do the characters go from there, right? Do we imagine that Daisy manages to tough it out with Tom and survive it? And does Jordan find happiness with a woman, or does she stay alone? And what do you guys think happens? Or Catherine, do you guys have any thoughts? I mean, this is like, she doesn't, she leaves us
It
with
does lead us, I think. So, Catherine is going to live wherever that is, in a farm or city, but Midwest,
Chicago.
New York City. But so,
I thought it was, am I wrong? Like the Carolinas or something?
So Chicago.
Went to Chicago.
Oh, sorry.
I thought.
and then Daisy and Tom will stay together, but somebody said that they're people who hurt people then move on together. He's done this so many times, every time they moved cities when he had an affair. So this is their modus operandi, just whatever.
But I thought at the end she was going back to her mother, and she had this very expensive pearl necklace. I thought the idea was he was going to sell the necklace.
And that all comes apart. Doesn't that all fall apart at the very end? Doesn't she go home with Tom to the new city?
let's see, right, because she says
Not in the Gillian Cantor book.
No, I think she does after.
I think that she did, but she goes to her mom with a necklace.
Right.
Yeah, where are we, Mama? Home.
Right.
And home is
she does seem
like
to leave
Louisville.
Right, she does seem to leave Tom, but we don't know, right? And she's going to her mother, but we don't know what is her mother, as you, right? I don't remember, was you, Ziva, or Phyllis, who said like she's going to go to her mother and her mother's going to send her back, right? So we don't know what's going to happen. And it's interesting, the necklace is actually in the original, priced from 1920, whatever, when F. Scott Fischel wrote it, as $350,000, which my students went onto a calculator and figured out was somewhere in the millions, even though I never knew pearls could be that, that expensive, but so yeah, it's a lot of money. So I can keep her for a while. So yeah, it's curious to think what's going to happen with her.
Another trick that I thought would be up somebody's sleeve is I thought that it was quite the coincidence that Daisy's cousin, who happens to move into a house adjacent. I thought maybe Gatsby, it would turn out to have arranged that in his ability to manipulate, but that didn't turn up.
But that was in the
Could have been a
old,
secret that died with him.
that's in the original that Nick is the cousin.
Nick is
So
Daisy's
Right.
third
that
cousin.
he finds an inexpensive place to live, to commute into the city that just happens to be next to Gatsby. I thought would be one of his like little machinations, but it didn't show up in the book.
Yeah. Oh no, that's true. Right. You would think, but yeah, no, right. It just seems like coincidence. Coincidence that just works out. That's true.
Yes, second cousin once removed, everybody's related like that.
I like
know
the
we-
thing about the hairpins. That was a cute little
A
thing
lot of hairpins floating around.
I
Huh?
actually,
in everyone's hands.
Diamond hairpin.
I have no idea where I got this idea from. Somewhere very innocent, like reading a different book. But the idea that somebody who is having an affair gets the same present for their wife and their mistress, so that the receipt is the same and they can talk about it the same. And so the fact that there was the same thing given to Myrtle, and yet there was enough that it was also, there were some for everybody, like everybody had one.
That's interesting. So you think that's like a device, or was it just at the time women, just everyone wore hairpins?
$3,000 at a pawn shop.
Right.
No, but I mean, that's there are things, there are ways that people were talking and were manipulating things in way. There was one that really stood out that seemed modern, because now everybody can use the same phrases. We're watching the same TV and media, and you can, on the internet, like I didn't take APUSH, I took AP US History because nobody in my school had made that acronym. And now everybody does everywhere. And so there was one of those devices that was used in the book. And then there was this also, that you get the same thing for her because, oh, women like it. Maybe that's all. Women like it. A woman told me to buy it for my wife, so I should get one for my mistresses.
Okay.
Well, Tom isn't that imaginative, I think, and this is what he does. He gives expensive jewelry.
Yes. Tom. So actually one of the interesting reads from the original, if you want to be somewhat generous with Tom, is that not just that he's just an entitled man who has voracious appetites and thinks he deserves to have whatever he wants. Because there's this suggestive line from Fitzgerald that he's reading a book on oh my goodness, what's it called? He's reading this book that's just about like racial tension. And literally F. Scott Fitzgerald has this great line about like, he's reading a book with big, like deep thoughts and big words. He literally uses this line, right? And there's this sense that Tom is feeling like he misses the glory days of college when he played football. And so there's this sense that, and that's the detail from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And so there's a sense that he's feeling like something is missing in his life. Because he's so wealthy, what does he have to do? Nothing. He gets to play polo all day, right? He literally has nothing to do. He's so rich. He's not even involved in his business endeavors. So that there's this emptiness gnawing away at him, which he tries to fill through lots of meaningless sex. And I guess gifts, right, to women, in a way that maybe you want to have a little bit of compassion on him. I mean, in Gillian Candor's book, there's no room for compassion. He just seems like a louse, but it's interesting to debate whether in Fitzgerald's book, there's a moment where maybe you're meant to like this guy. And the way that it comes up in our discussion of like, who's Fitzgerald, is that there's almost like a mix, like he's envious of Tom, but at the same time, he puts Tom down. Right. And so, is Tom meant to be seen as like, is he meant to be vilified, or is there any room for compassion? So I don't know what you guys think, but
A little compassion. He said Myrtle didn't deserve this, right? In Jillian's book, I don't remember in Fitzgerald's.
So you think that moment kind of humanizes Tom for you?
Yeah, a little bit. Because you think she's just a plaything, right? But at least he feels bad that she got run over.
Okay.
He did feel some connection to it. I don't know if you call it love. I do remember him also going over to the body, right? Or something like that. Like it was his instinctual reaction. And he didn't hold back to anybody at that moment.
Right.
I mean, I thought that was
Almost had a
think
feeling.
back, I felt some real feeling in him for a person.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Tom?
The one other thing they said, he didn't go to Gatsby's party. Now, he said those are the nouveau riche, like it was beneath him. But on the other hand, he didn't just do what everyone else did. So that was not a bad thing about him.
No, that's true. He didn't. In some ways, no. He's such an odd person because at the same time, he would flaunt the women that he would be seeing on the side, his mistresses. He would take them to public restaurants. So he wasn't trying to hide. And yet, but at the same time, he also, right, he doesn't go to the parties. So it's interesting to try to get a read on him. I find like it's one of the fun books to analyze Gatsby is just to see how students put the pieces together and what their takeaway. One little fact, I'm curious what you guys think. There's one little thing from the original story where Daisy, it's said in particular that once she starts to see that Tom cheats on her and she's being strung along with him as they're traipsing around, Chicago, France, that she stops drinking. So she is going to parties with Tom. Everybody's getting plastered and she refuses to drink. And there's a suggestive line as if like, because when people drink, like if you're the only one sober, I mean, I can't remember exactly, I'm paraphrasing Fitzgerald's line, but basically when you're the only one sober around drunk people, no one will remember things about you, which is such an odd little line. I don't know what you guys think about that, especially also reading Beautiful Little Fools. Because there's a little bit of commentary about whether she drinks or how she drinks, but I don't know. I'm just curious if.
Do you mean that because she doesn't drink, she's not, can sort of fade away into the background?
Like it's a choice that she makes. So when she's out and about because this is the 1920s, right? Like parties were rocking, right? Great music and dancing and people getting plastered. And even though she's in that environment, she purposefully holds herself back.
If she were to drink, she wouldn't be able to stop. And maybe shallow as she's portrayed, maybe she at least knows that about herself, that if she were to drink, she will have the night before her wedding drinking. She will have the night of the party drinking. And so those are the only two real times that you see it, because she won't drink a little. She'll drink and they'll have nothing left to herself.
She doesn't drink with Jordan, like at the house. I thought they were always drinking. No, not drinking, getting drunk, but she doesn't. I didn't realize she doesn't drink.
Well, I mean, she'll sip some stuff, but she doesn't. The language is more about like when she goes to parties.
Okay.
She's fearful. Yeah, quiet, privately in the house, she definitely drinks. I don't know I don't think she drinks a lot, but there always seems to be tons of alcohol in this book.
Prohibition, right?
Yeah, actually, one of the fun things that Gillian Cantor includes is a recipe for all the different drinks that her characters drink. So it was. In case you want to make your own.
For book clubs.
Gin and tonic needs no tonic.
So she's got Daisy's mint julep, Jordan's pink gin and tonic, Catherine's gin Ricky, Myrtle's Mary Pickford, Tom's hanky panky, and Detective Frank Charles's old fashioned. So lots of alcohol in this book.
That seems almost too responsible of Daisy. And also when I said I don't think she's very active, that's taking a stance on something. So it doesn't fit to me.
I know. That's why it's such an odd moment. I don't know what to make of it. Like exactly. You put it really well. Something about it just feels, because it makes then other moments like, do I trust this moment? And that's how does it color the rest? or does the rest, all the other stuff we know about her is dominant, and this is just an odd quirk that she has? I just think it's interesting. Gillian Cantor also included about 15, she has 15 lines or 15 moments that she identifies from the original. So we started all of this kind of with your question, Ziva, about how, about how does it work to take the creative, to take a book that you love and either rewrite it or engage with it, so you have a story that you're rewriting that intersects with it. And that's a great question, because on the one hand, you want to be interacting with the stories and in your mind, at least in your imagination, have the liberty to do that. And I'm actually curious if people want to go around to share. Does anybody actually have a book of their own that's like a book that you love, that you, if you ever decided to become a writer, would you take on a project like Gillian Cantor's? Is there like a book that you're like, I love this book, I'm so curious to explore the how and the if, or provide a backstory? Anyone have any books that come to mind?
I say, I mean, people have taken what are the women's stories of the Bible and made a story of just that, like that's the closest to this you're gonna get.
And I read a book on Ahab's wife, which was a very good book. I imagine it's been done, the women's side of things.
Oh, for sure. I'm just curious for you. Actually, last year, no, at this point, it's already 3 years ago. So about 3 years ago, a few writers actually decided to take Pride and Prejudice and write some of those stories. So 2 books were written about Mary, who's the quiet, boring sister, one of which was bad, one of which was fantastic. I could not put it down. It was amazing. Then someone took the cousin of Anne de Bourgh, the sickly cousin that Darcy was meant to marry, and made a backstory for her. So for sure, it's done, and it's fun to read these stories. I'm just curious for you individually, like, is there a book that in your own imagination you're like, I'm kind of curious about thinking about some of the side storylines?
I don't know if I'm literary enough to think that way.
I think I know. And my favorite book is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I like the mother, Katie, so much. I'd like to know what I'd like a prequel on Katie, like how she grew up with Sissy and, her sisters.
Okay. That would be fun and interesting. I think for me, I'm curious about Dracula. I find it fun to teach. I taught it for many years, and I just find it's a fun book to think about. Yeah. Anyone else have any?
But you're saying that the victims' stories or the prequel story, or where it ends
so
to
actually, Minna Harper, that's one of the women that he tries to come onto. Maybe it's kind of suggested. And she's like this very strong woman. But she ends up getting like sucked dry by, well, she doesn't die like Lucy, but she ends up getting, I don't know, like sucked dry by Dracula. So I'm just kind of curious to like, what would, thinking about the meeting of Minna and Dracula, is she excited by it, intrigued by it, turned off by it? Because she seems like this very open woman. So I'm just curious, but that's like,
Which one? Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff. He made such a turnaround to be so mean. Like, how did that happen? I reread that a few years ago.
Oh, and did you like it as you reread it as an adult?
I like them all better as an adult. As a student, you're almost skimming. You just have to get through it, I think, at least back in the day. So yeah, some things I read with my kids, some I just did on my own. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
The Little Women movie that's fairly recent. I mean, that goes well beyond what's on the pages, and it puts the story of the writer into the book. And I think that's a good way that not writing it as another book, but in a movie adaptation, it adds a depth that you can't experience. Well, a modern novel would chop it up the way that this one was, but they wouldn't have done then.
It's true. And that was actually very deliberate, right? Though if you listen to the commentary by the directors, it was like, we wanted to make this a much more woman conscious kind
Female
of
gaze. Yeah.
what? Yeah.
The female gaze, not the male gaze.
Exactly.
Gaze.
Okay.
Is it
Anyone?
important- Is it important in this book that the detective is paid off by Wolfsheim, or that's just she's setting it up for us?
Oh, it's a good question.
It continues him to pursue it when it's a closed case.
Mhm.
And also,
They
it-
give him a motive for doing that.
yeah, I mean, normally you're not paid and you wouldn't have the budget to go to these people outside. And I think the closure of the book itself was good. Like Tom and Daisy a little bit deserve each other. She deserves better, but she needs it, and that's the price you pay to be with Tom. But other people getting to go in their trajectories, including a detective who he got a backstory. He had a sister who was strangled, and then he wanted to figure things out and make sure things sit with him. And he found the barrette to be important. He found where did you find it to be important. And he found a way to get the money without finding any of these women in the river, which was a really good.
Does he get
that was an
paid?
important twist.
Do we
gets
think he's
paid.
getting paid, even though he didn't? Oh, he
Yeah,
hasn't paid
he
with
got
Wilson.
paid. He
That
got
was
a
so
house
smart
in,
and kind of him that he
Right, right.
said, no, that's the case. And so the guy who's paying him gets the peace of mind. The case
Closure.
remains closed, and the pact between the three women is
Right,
unbroken,
right.
even though he knows that
It's
one
not
of them are
just-
lying.
Right.
I mean, in that sense, it definitely ends with, score 1 for the women, in a way that in the original, it's score 0 for the women, basically.
Right.
I mean, Daisy gets away with it, but with murder, but in this case, out strong, which is
Wait, why did you say with the driving? Right.
the driving. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's an accident, maybe not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be any of these people.
But
Maybe,
you're right.
maybe Catherine, maybe, but probably not. She is lonely, even though it's good to be independent.
Well, she keeps saying that, I don't need you, and then she's so angry when he leaves, and is going after
And
Daisy.
he hurts
so-
her so much. I think that was the line I was thinking of. That's very modern. No, I never did care for you.
Mhm.
Oh, you thought I cared? No, I don't care for you.
Yeah, Catherine, you felt for Catherine in this book, right? That she's so badly used by Gatsby, right? So badly used.
In the end, but it was consensual, and it's just then she was hurt.
I mean, he's manipulating her, like he's using her and manipulating her. I don't know. You don't think she feels badly used? Like, you think there was actually mutual, what, like any part of it? It was
Once Myrtle gets involved. She wanted money, and then once you get money from him, there's a cost for that. And he is not going to be responsible for the consequences of giving her money. He didn't give her his own money. He gave $100 and screwed up her life and got her killed. But he didn't say, I'm going to throw, Myrtle at. He didn't know that she would be specifically pretty. He didn't know that would specifically take off.
Oh no, that's true. But I mean, nothing about his using Catherine. I mean, just I feel for her that there's
But I
knowing.
think she went in with open eyes. She was fine with that sort of relationship. Late by the end, she wasn't, but at the beginning, she was.
Well, he didn't use her in the sexual relationship, but it was after that
Correct.
when he got her to, put her sister in Tom's way. That was when he used her.
Yeah, but I guess I felt for her because he used, like, I guess once you open up that door through a sexual relationship, even if it's casual, you have this vulnerability. And so I felt for her that he unabashedly, like with no compunction, went into that vulnerability and took advantage of it in a way that, I mean, maybe it's very real that people do that. I just felt for her.
I don't know. Did
also-
he know he was giving her more than $100? He was giving her $100, and I'm going to take these pictures. It sounded like he was surprised that the affair took off when it first happened.
Right. Yeah, he didn't know it would. He just wanted to take some photos, I guess.
Well, you know,
That
when,
was what he said.
Yeah, but he is manipulative, right? Because he was with Jordan, right? He was threatening her.
Yeah.
I was going to say that we didn't discuss that, the blackmailing or that kind of discussion between Jordan and Gatsby, which was not in the book. That was interesting.
Yeah. Well, Gatsby, like all of this manipulation seems
Right.
is Jillian Cantor.
Right.
In the book itself, there's nothing other than a man who pines and does everything he can to have access to Daisy, but he never crosses lines like blackmailing anybody. He's so much more hesitant. He feels so unworthy of her, even at the same time that he thinks he deserves to have her. And so you get a whole new version in here where he's very deserving and therefore comfortable doing all kinds of manipulative things. So all of that manipulation is new.
which
Yeah.
seems a little, the fact that he, I don't know, maybe I don't know enough about Carrie, but like that somebody could be so obsessed with a woman and feel that original connection so deeply, and then be so and have an absence of that type of feeling with another woman, you know, with Catherine.
Thinking of Daisy is what carried him through a time of war and poverty. And so he magnified her beyond anybody's ability. It's amazing that he met her and wasn't like, oh my gosh, I forgot you weren't that pretty. Because there's some point in the newer book where it describes Daisy as not being that pretty. Like, I think maybe Catherine encounters her, I think, and says, oh, I thought she'd be like really pretty. You know, is to Gatsby and in every one of the descriptions, and is to Jordan because she crushes on her through childhood, teenage, and even still, but is mostly charismatic. And maybe that's what Gatsby saw in her, that she's charismatic and he's kind of charismatic. And what kind of con game could they do together?
So in the original, this is where actually F. Scott Fitzgerald gets, or some of his most poetic passages. And by poetic, I mean lofty and esoteric. The passages that describe when Gatsby meets Daisy and how she comes to be like frozen in time. And so it's really beautiful passages about basically what she comes to mean for him and why it becomes so immutable, because he can never change it. And there is suggested when he does meet up with her later that she does fall a little short, but he can't admit it to himself. So it's like somewhere inside he feels, ooh, she's not quite measuring up to the, as Fitzgerald calls it, the colossal vitality of his imagination, but of his illusion actually is a specific phrase that he uses, but he can't accept it. So he kind of brushes that feeling under the rug and continues on in his fixation. And yeah, it's clearly a combination of like this beautiful woman, but just meets, like he kind of latches onto her and puts onto her all these other dreams. And so really she's just a representation of all these other dreams. And you don't get the sense it has anything to do with like a real flesh and blood woman, which is why Nancy, he can treat other women so poorly, because it's not like he's a real gentleman. He's just obsessed or fixated on this concept. And maybe that's why he's able to be so ruthless to everybody else, because he's got a mission and he's got a.
Also, you know how you said in this book, we like him less because he behaves poorly or he's mean. I want to talk about the funeral, that Nick is so sad that no one shows up. He calls this one, only the father shows up. Are we a little sad in the book when he dies? Like here, he deserves it, no doubt. I can't remember. So that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, I would say yes. You're able to feel Nick's compassion because you have no reason to dislike him. And
Right.
all you feel is that everybody abandoned him. Even Daisy doesn't come to
Right.
the, right? No one from the parties. So you feel it. Here, it's like good riddance.
Right.
Come to you, you're a horrible human being. In the book, yeah, you kind of feel with him, like, why has no one come?
Right. That's sad. After the contrast with the parties and then the empty funeral.
I like that the owl-eyed glasses guy reappears. I can't remember, but he was in the original book being impressed by the library, or is that the new book that he's
No.
like, wow, check out this library. The books are real with words on them. Is that the original? I forget because I read them in succession.
That's the original, but he also comments like, I don't think anyone opens the books. They're just kind of sitting there, these newly printed books just sitting on the bookshelf.
But he's a funny character because if that was in the original, because the original I read yesterday and the new one I read today, but the that he appears late because he's a drunk, but he appears late at the funeral because there's a good guy who's just really sad and drunk all the time there that has something to hold on to that he's going to miss from these parties in a way that other people were at the party to see and be seen, whereas he was in the party to be in that room and pretend something that we don't get in on. I thought it was nice to have him included at that little bit in the funeral. Like, we should have somebody. Who should it be combing through the pages of the original? Let's bring him in over here. And I liked him there.
Yeah. Yeah. Not even Mayor Wolfshine comes. He cuts ties, which is so interesting. Like if the gangster is cutting ties because he doesn't want to be seen or commit to it, then it's interesting.
And the thing about the father tells a story of Gatsby as a young boy, and that list, is that in the original book too?
Yeah. And it's you actually that is the place with the most esoteric language. He actually compares him to Jesus. It's really like my students are like, what is happening? He compares him to Jesus. He has this beautiful language where he basically births himself. He like sprung out of almost like, you know, how Zeus, like Athena kind of bursts out of Zeus's brain. So Jay Gatsby is like this creature that bursts out of his own head and he births himself. So he gets like very poetic in those descriptions when the father comes along and they talk about, and you have this book where literally the kid at 13 was like, I'm going to get up at 6 and I'm going to work out. I'm going to, yeah. And
his father isn't upset about the name change. His father is proud of his son for making whatever of himself.
I think I could see that. I think, even though he never contacted the father, which is sad.
He did. He sent a picture of the house. That might be in the book. He sent a picture of the house, and he visited 2 years before.
Okay, but it sounds like the father still lives in poverty.
No, he bought the house the father lives in.
Oh, he did. Oh, in the real book also. Oh.
In the original book.
Oh, so they gave him something nice.
It's funny, just for a trippy experience. If you were to pass the book along to somebody, have them read it back to back and forget which one comes from which.
Right.
Just one more thing about Nick. So it's sort of interesting. You've said earlier that we get a lot of the description of Gatsby in the original novel from Nick. And it is a little bit of a, like Nick isn't married, and even his going around with Jordan over the summer, that's sort of like connects to Jillian's, like if she's a lesbian, like in this Beautiful Little Fools, then it makes more sense. Their sort of companionship. Neither maybe is in the original book. Neither of them is really interested in each other. They're just using each other for partnership. And yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the questions when you read it is he himself using her, and is his infatuation with Gatsby sexual in some way, just closeted? Because there are 2 weird moments in the original story where he seems to have a homoerotic moment. So the end of chapter 2 at the party, when Tom smashes his palm against Daisy's nose.
Myrtle.
Not Disney, sorry, yeah, against Myrtle's nose. It says that Nick said he got drunk for the second time in his life and he's plastered, so he can't make it home from the city to Long Island. So he goes to the couple who lives downstairs, and it says there's these 2 sentences or 3 sentences with a lot of ... Basically, like he wakes up and the guy who's presented as like an anemic, scrawny very effeminate man is standing over him. And there's a lot of like literal ... dots where you just don't know what's happening. Why is this guy standing over him? Is he taking care of him because his, Nick is puking, or is there something sexual going on? So there's a weird moment. And then there's this other moment where Nick on the train bends down when something drops and kind of looks, I think, at the conductor. There's also like some weird little sexual moment. So it's hard to tell, like, is he just a closeted guy and that's why he's obsessed with Gatsby? Or is he just like an asexual guy who's not really connected to anyone sexually, but just there's something, Gatsby's a charismatic man. And he loves the concept of this man who made himself from nothing, because F. Scott Fitzgerald made himself from nothing, so to speak, rose from middle class, boring, moral, Midwest life into this really exciting writer living in a very exciting, circle of people. So it's interesting to think about who Nick is and what the energy is in the book. And that's completely like totally open to debate. And
But one of the, I think, good positive things about Fitzgerald's book is that there's so much unknown and mystery. And by filling it all in, we like it, but does that take away from it? I don't know.
It's a great question. We can end with that. What do you guys think? Like, are we missing something? Are we like, is Gatsby missing out by having books like this come and fill in the gap? Or is it just a fun exercise that still leaves all the questions open? What do you guys?
Writing is so lyrical in the original, and there are little splashes of it here and there in the new book, but they're like parts that are just worth reading as if they were taken from a poem in the original. Whereas now I think that the character analysis is the strength. And it's like, well, plenty of people have done PhDs on this, right? Isn't that what people do, right? People compare this and that, and Gatsby is often in one of them. And so then this time it got put into something that's worth as a read in itself. We don't normally read PhDs. This is this person's big project. And it was consistent, like the mystery of who did it, whoever got there first. And then they swore to secrecy. Yay, women. Okay.
Also, I thought, like when, Jordan's a golf person and she gets thrown off the circuit, whatever you call it. When I went back to reviewing Gatsby, there's a line, she didn't make anything up that wasn't in there. Maybe that's a strong statement, but most things were alluded to in the book. And I found that interesting.
Nothing was inconsistent.
Right.
Yeah.
And he touched on all these things. Her short hair, it fits that she might be gay. I don't know. They always put her in pants. I don't know if that's how I visualize her. But anyway, so he touched on all these things. And so maybe he had it in his mind. I don't know when he was writing it, but she fleshed it out for us. So it was clear.
Yeah. But I don't, right. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Adina, Phyllis, Nancy, or John about, do you think that are we detracting from the original by having this story fill in, or is it just a fun exercise in imagination and the questions still, are still there from the original, and it's just a fun activity?
I thought it was just a fun activity. It was a good read.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I'm not so married to the original anyway,
Okay. Oh, so what was it like to read for you if you actually did not like Gatsby's, like the original novel so much? So what was that like for you, Dina? Like, was it more fun to read? Like, do you like this one better because of it? Or did it do anything retroactively to make you like Gatsby better?
I think both, maybe both. It made me appreciate the original better.
Okay.
But I wouldn't like it if someone did this to like The Chosen, Hi-Fi and Potok, which is my Tanakh, So I don't know.
The Great Gatsby was never one of my favorite books. Maybe this time when I read it, I got a little bit more out of it. But I thought it was fun how she took the story and developed it, and I thought it was good. I mean, I as I said at the very beginning, it kept my interest through. I thought it was a little light, but I kept reading it. I wanted to know what happens.
I agree with you. And maybe that's sort of a way to close that, what you just said. We all enjoyed this, but I think it helps us it differentiates from his. His is on a higher level. This is a light read. His is literary and everything else that, I don't know, English teachers speak about. So it makes us appreciate Gatsby more, but we enjoyed
Not
this
a
as
great
well.
American novel, but I could imagine somebody reading this 10 years from now, if they liked Gatsby or hadn't, or even watched the movie of Gatsby and then wanted to revisit it again.
Right, but this doesn't stand alone. I guess that's maybe also part of the point.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what it'll be like to read this if you didn't read the original. I mean, I think
thought,
stuff will be lost. Like it may be good, but a lot will be lost.
Right.
And it's twice as long, so.
Uh-huh.
It goes quickly.
Isn't it?
Fair enough. Well, thank you everybody so much for
Thank
your
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Good night.
We have one, I
Right.
probably should just say this, we have one more book in the series. It's Trust by Diaz, I think. And does anybody remember the date? You'll
May
find it
16th, I think.
May 16th, you said?
I think so.
And Molly
May
Pollock,
16th, Herman Diaz Trust.
Right.
Molly Pollock.
and Molly Pollock is going to be the leader of that discussion. Thank you so much, Chana.
Peace
And-
out, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Nice
thank you.
choice for all of us.
Yeah. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.